Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Maverick Mystic Arts podcast. And I'm joined here today with a very unique man who's taken a very, very fascinating path throughout all of this spiritual exploration. And a very big part of this path at certain stages is health. And so we're going to jump right in. I'm here with Jeremy. How do I pronounce your last name?
Buhay.
That. And we were just excitedly discussing a unique topic, so we're going to dive right in. We'll get to some history after. A unique topic called methylation.
Genetic methylation testing.
Genetic methylation testing. And I'm just going to hand it over to you.
Yeah. Mind-blowing stuff. Testing whether or not our genes are mutated and do they have the ability to function as they're supposed to. So I did this genetic methylation testing maybe a couple weeks ago. I found out that my body does not produce the enzyme needed to break down folate. From birth to now, my body hasn't been able to actually break that essential B vitamin down. That all these symptoms from a really young age, the pale skin, looking undernourished, the skin issues, psoriasis, ADHD, anxiety, all of these things related to this inability to break down folate. And so the genetic methylation testing, they took a swab of my cheek and they tested, and it was like 28 different genes, found out that one's mutated, and got a whole workup of what that means, and the solution was simple. Take in the methylated, broken down form of folate to complete the pathway.
And so the methylation is something that occurs for most people organically as a part of a metabolic process. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the byproduct of that broken pathway for me meant like really high levels of homocysteine. And that leads to all the symptoms I've been having for my whole life.
And is homocysteine like inflammation?
It's a chemical. It's a metabolic byproduct of that pathway, and because I'm not clearing it out because my pathway is broken.
Right.
Basically.
So the homocysteine builds up.
Yeah.
Because it can't pass through a pathway that doesn't exist, and that pathway is a methylation pathway.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's sort of a is it a cellular version of like respiration?
I don't know if respiration is the right word or not.
Or eating food and crafting it out. Like there's a metabolic something that's occurring.
Yeah. I'm still diving into the finer points of it. And so my supplementation is based on lowering that homocysteine down.
Right.
And within a week, my ability to regulate my nervous system's through the roof. I've had a glass ceiling in my human experience and everything I've done. Suddenly my ceiling is now here.
And when you say regulate the nervous system, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so for me, it's getting out of an overstimulated fight or flight scenario back into a nice centered, balanced, grounded, regulated state.
Yeah, I think that's so important just to highlight for folks is like when your nervous system is jacked, when your organs are jacked, when you're in physiological distress, the ease with which you can be centered, calm, collected, make good decisions, everything is it's so much harder, and that difficulty is amplified. And like with most things, it's not until we experience the difference that we realize what duress we were under. And sometimes I know for myself, like looking back in time, like, oh my God, like how did he do it? Once you experience that ease, it's that big sigh of like, oh, it can actually be that easy. It doesn't take moment by moment perfection of awareness and cool, collected perfection of mental calm to be calm. You can actually be in a body that's not in torrential and horrendous upset.
Yeah, it's like that's available now. It's like I hear about these things and the amount of work it took to get to that place was like, it's a lot of work. Apparently, like 10 to 50% of the population has this mutation. It's quite common. We all have a lot of mutations. how much they affect us physiologically, there's a big degree of variability there. But like, do that test. You only got to do it once in your life. Take a look. Are your genes functioning well? Are they not? How do you need to supplement that in? And then, if there's a deficiency, and that deficiency is finally met, there's so much more available. It's like, wow, boom, oh, I hear a thing. Like, you see somebody's freaking out. Usually I get pulled into that story, and suddenly now I'm like, there's some space. I'm hearing it differently. There's nothing happening in here, but I'm hearing their drama story. Like, well, that's nice.
Oh, I bet. I mean,
yeah,
it's an interesting phenomenon that takes place as one begins meditative type practices, where due to a more moment by moment awareness, a story or some subconscious impulse or sensation or phenomenal contact of some sensegate, whatever it is, that might have in the past lit off a sequence of story-related events that might take you into a mood for days or more, a week, whatever. You can recognize it, and then it just is gone a few seconds later. And the parts of us that cling and attach to these things, the more upset there is, the more of that upset is going to cling. And I've certainly noticed that myself in the worse my health is. I remember a point where it's like, okay, organs are shutting down, like everything's pretty nasty. And having done a bunch of meditation, I remember recognizing, I can't trust my thoughts anymore. And I watched this process, and it took about 6 months from when things initially started to feel pretty bad for the poor health to be greater than my capacity for release. And as the health starts to improve, it's phenomenal. And that you're noticing these relationships to the internal stories that we create and these moment by moment shifts that occur.
Yeah.
That's pretty phenomenal. Really phenomenal.
Yeah, a brain that's stuck in this protective mode because there's something happening physiologically inside. It's going to view things from a certain lens because that amygdala, that fight or flight system, we can't turn off. It's been that way for a whole person's life. My whole life. Yeah. So it's wild stuff.
Yeah, I'm very excited for you because we met a few months back, and I saw you again. I think it was 1 week into taking these methylation protocol pills and stuff, and I don't know from the week prior, but from when I saw you a few months ago, the difference is just freaking phenomenal. Now you mentioned, sort of the nervous system dysregulation, we might say, and that where you were oscillating up here all the time, or if you want to look at the other way, you can look at it that way too. Now everything has a more calm baseline. So outside of the methylation breakdown physiologically, were there like key moments in your life that you think may have enhanced that hyperactive nervous system?
They mean like, you say in life, like recent or throughout my...
Well, what it seems like with the nervous system is that it holds on to, like, stuff happens, and unless it's addressed, it sort of resides in the nervous system, and it gets like pressurized through somewhat similar events, and it sort of becomes reinvigorated again and again in different ways once it's set in, and then further traumas, we might say, whether like physiological, emotional, mental, start to stack on top of these old traumas like a nub on a very clean sheet, and dirt goes by and picks up on that nub, and more and more accumulates. Eventually a tree grows or whatever. So there's no pressure to share anything in particular. Whatever you're comfortable with. I do think that for a lot of folks, that if we hear a situation, like I experienced something similar, this guy's gone through this crazy path, and look where he is.
So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding the question clearly. I'm pretty much an open book at this point. I've got no shame around things and experiences. I just want to answer it as concisely as I can. So experiences that would have caused then the root causes of this dysregulation, perhaps?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's get into the nitty gritty.
Yeah, where to start?
And while you ponder that, I will add for people that these big points, when we go down the rabbit hole and we find these key events that can lead to dysregulations or to hyperactive nervous systems, resolving these can be dramatically powerful. At the same time, obsession over them can lead to some pretty interesting and further dysregulations. And there's many people who I've met and worked with who it becomes the whole identity.
Yeah.
And then the whole healing process stops happening because the individual engaging in the healing is, in a sense, and this may sound harsh, but quite proud of what they are working and living in spite of.
Wound worshipping? Is that a good...
Wound worshipping.
Yeah.
Wound worshipping. Simple, to the point. I like it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's different for everybody, but developmental trauma is kind of the biggest one that sticks. My understanding is that it's basically from 0 to age 7, a child functions in primarily a theta frequency in the brain, right? This being like a beta, intellectually meditating, we go into this alpha. Theta is usually sleeping, and so as a child functioning in that theta frequency, primarily we're subconsciously programming ourselves to survive in this environment. And so in my case, at around 3-ish, my dad left us on welfare with nothing. And that had a big impact on my nervous system. Because the father being the one who is supposed to provide safety and groundedness, and when that element is gone, what's left is fear. And a child who is depending on themselves to be safe. And what 3-year-old can actually do that? They can't. And so that would be the big one that sort of has informed most of my experience up until, well, and still does, actually. And so, but I keep coming back to the gold that's bringing forth for me. And the challenges that it's brought and what I've learned through re-regulating and my nervous system and learning how that conditioning has created the opportunity to dive deeper within to understand myself. And then when I approach somebody as a chiropractor, I can kind of see and feel what, where their nervous system is at, where their story is at, and where I can relate my own experiences, not being too personal, but like understanding how they have been conditioned in a certain way similar to how I was. And then how they may benefit from things that I've experienced, like the Qi Gong or the adjustments or the nutritional stuff, what have you. But that's a pretty big one. It's actually informed most of my life, that fear of abandonment being so big, and then being so default to abandoning my authentic experience in an effort to fit in, and then not really knowing who I am until diving into the spiritual world, and then the healing and reintegrating those parts of myself that I've shoved aside, thinking that those parts weren't welcome. Yeah. Does that sort of fit a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any clear memories from that time when you were 3?
I was told a story, I don't quite remember, that my aunt and uncle were driving. I'm 3 in the back of the seat. And out of nowhere, my dad had already been gone for a long time. And it just said, my dad's been gone a long time. He has a lot of work to do. I don't know where he was. I thought he was at work for 3 years.
Oh.
Yeah. He came back, to his credit, when he decided he wanted to be a father again. But by that time, I'd already programmed my brain, my adaptive capacity was around survival. And once the subconscious is programmed, it's really hard to reprogram it, as you know. And that's where plant medicines have been effective for me. Learning about the brain and how to regulate that hyper-responsive protection that it has been doing. And then connecting to that little part of myself, that's really so, it's like the protection that I put around my little 3-year-old heart, it's like it's still so fresh in there. And it's almost like it's locked in time a little bit. But it's innocent and powerful and pure, that part of me that's still, because of that wound, I've contacted that 3-year-old part of myself, the heart of a child, which is really a beautiful thing.
And so almost as a result of that, it preserved that 3-year-old. Some part got shattered off and preserved.
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
That's very fascinating.
Yeah, it took me a long time to really figure out when I connected that part, because the grief was so big, because the love was so big of a child for his father. A little 3-year-old, it's kind of like the little narcissistic tiny humans where the world revolves around them, and there's mom and there's dad, and it's kind of like these two beings that are everything, and then half of it's gone. And the pain that caused was actually, and it's still there. And now, because of the work I've done, I can make contact with it, but I don't have to get lost in it. And the pain doesn't have to go anywhere. And there's so much anger, but that's also how much passion is there, because the love was so big. And that fuels me when I see and come across somebody who has a similar wound and we can share. And it drives me in such a way, because I have access to all of this power inside me now because of that wound. It's like I told you a bit about doing that spirit bathing in the river, and this whole giant process was because of that wound inside me.
So let's use that as a jumping point here, because it's often these weird, either traumatic or peculiar childhood experiences that percolate over time. And at some point manifest into a decision. And that decision so often rides on the back of a type of being done with discontent, or your pain, or your anger, or just you're recognizing that there's something that's current that you would like to be different. So was there a particular moment for you where that decision was made and you started looking for potential avenues of healing or spiritual dissolution and exploration?
After 10 years of university and a lot of drinking and a lot of fun times.
Those 10 years including the chiropractic, it's a doctor degree?
I was introduced to ayahuasca in 2013. That was an enlightening experience. It just showed me essentially that there was a lot more to this human experience than I was even aware of. That was like a little knock on the door, really.
Right. Why did you say yes to doing ayahuasca?
Well, that's a question. That's the fool in me that just says yes and finds out afterwards that maybe I should use a bit better discernment, or should have, It's like, if I would have studied that, I might not have actually done it, so maybe it's better that I don't. That's that fool card in the tarot,
Of course.
Yeah. Even in chiropractic school, I was like, I'm going to apply. Oh, I got in. That's from the chiropractic. Had I known I was going to do so much work, there's no way I would have did it.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But in that world, I get a lot of sweat lodges, a lot of sun dancing, a lot of as a firekeeper, and a lot of ayahuasca and different things. But again, looking for something authentic and real.
You were not finding the authentic and real thing in the ayahuasca in the was it sun dances you said?
Yeah.
All the things you just mentioned. In what ways was that missing for you or from the environment?
There was something missing. I didn't know something was missing until I met a man who didn't have that thing missing.
Contrast.
And what I've learned and I've experienced, that thing missing was humility. And I just came across some study recently that said like the one attribute that cross-culturally, globally, historically throughout the whole planet, the one common thing from indigenous cultures is humility. That's not seen in our current culture as being super important. But humility was that number one thing. It's like you have to have that thing. And I met a man, an elder from the Klahoma Nation here in John Louis, that something is different about him. I'm like, And that was it. I'm like, what did you do? He didn't tell me nothing, really. He's like, shared his story about doing the spirit bathing in the river. And he told me that he went through residential school and all those experiences and came to a point where he was ready to do some really deep healing, and went to his elders and they said, we can't teach you until you go into this river and do the spirit bathing every day for a year. He wouldn't tell him nothing. And he had inherited gifts from his family, and that's why he really told me. He says, yeah, this is what I did. Then one day I find myself in a big group of people doing a big group spirit bath. And he was led by him. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. It's so subtle. There's nothing flashy about it. And I went and talked to him a few times, and I was like, how does this look? How does it go? And I was curious about doing that spirit. Like, what even is that? And he says, oh, yeah, when there's trauma, And what I liked about his story was that we both have, we've done things in the past that maybe we're not proud of due to childhood experiences. He was taken from his family and he was a kid, put in that school, bad things happened to him, and that had an impact on him. And similar to me, I had bad things happen to me, and I was like, I can relate to this guy because he was sharing real things. He wasn't just saying, here's some knowledge, here's some wisdom, blah, 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 do the thing, read the book, da-da-da. No, it was just he was really authentic about who he was. And there was no shame, there was no holding back. I could feel when he looked at me, it's like he saw me. And I was like, oh, that's scary. And then there was there wasn't an ounce of judgment. There wasn't an ounce of trying to fix me. There was nothing except, here's what I was taught. And he says, when there's trauma, your spirit goes up in the mountain, you call it back to you through the river. I'm like, that's interesting. And so I started doing it. After I got a feel for him, I'm like, whatever he's doing is something good.
So that, you mentioned that humility was sort of the word, that the first thing that really stuck out to you. I don't know if it's something we can verbalize, but what, if anything, was the difference in that feeling compared to what you experienced prior?
It's hard to put my finger on it. My feeling is that kind of humility is handed to you through life experiences. There was no, life will beat it India. It's life, that kind of humility just comes through living. Really living, making mistakes, and then coming to a place of complete there's no judgment, and just the way he spoke wasn't as if he had an answer, as if he knew something. He was in tune with the moment. He was present to what wanted to come through him when we spoke. There was not an ounce of selfishness or arrogance in anything he's ever said to me. I come across a lot of teachers that want to say things that I can kind of tell at this point. They're saying the things for themselves.
Yeah, I mean the teacher thing is like everything is a stage, you know, everything's a stage, another stage, another stage, another stage, these layers of evolution. And a really difficult one to move beyond, I think for a lot of us, is that compulsion to impose what is right onto everything and everyone around us. And I have found, very similarly to how you described John, was his name, right? The people who I've grown to become friends with and respect quite a lot, don't, when I grill them on it, like you have to like love incredibly and care not at all. And if there's any part of us that needs somebody else to be a certain way or to do a certain thing, and that's in any way connected to the teacher, then there's going to be some negative stuff that's going to roll out of it. And most people, once they reach a certain stage in relation to a teacher, there's often discontent and ill will that starts to build up from the student towards the teacher as a byproduct of that hierarchy differential. And that power thing that is often imposed by the teacher. And so it's so beautiful that you found somebody who didn't have that and offered you this spirit bathing as an introduction, as opposed to a bunch of lessons. Here, let me tell you how to live your life. Oh, the river will do it. So would you like to elaborate a little bit on what spirit bathing is?
Yeah, you know, and just to elaborate, the traditional way of teaching isn't, it's so counter to what I've been taught being a long-term academic. He says that John was kind of like me at a certain point. He said he would go to his elders and he'd be like, you ask so many questions. He's like, they're like, the teaching is go do and learn. So that was it. You know, I was like, I'd be going doing a thing and come back to John and it's like, oh yeah, I know where you're at. Keep going. Here's some of this devil's club plant. Let's do this. Make some of this medicine. And so there's no like espousing of any kind of wisdom or knowledge. It comes to you when you're ready. And the danger of a lot of this stuff too is that people want for a very good reason. Example, John was talking about an eagle feather, and one day I was like, oh yeah, I'd like to learn. He looks at me and says, why do you think you want to know that? I'm like, oh, why do I want to know that? That hungry ghost within me really wanted that knowledge, for maybe because I just wanted the power behind it, or who knows. But so he never really gives me anything. And the spirit bathing was part of that. And that, you know, I would go to this water and on the West Coast, man. I worked at elders from Bella Bella. I worked there for a year. This nation here, people down on the island, everybody on the West Coast has a version of this. And it's a purification ceremony. And it used to be every day at sunrise. My understanding is a community would gather and they would do their bathing each day. And it's amazingly simple. You just tobacco is a good place to start with, where you go, you know, take some cedar from this tree, and you want to always, you ever just take as you always give to, you offer some tobacco, and then you take that cedar down to the water, and you know, I'm conscious about trying to oversay too much, you know. The nuts and bolts are pretty universal, let's say. And so I was taught in a way that was from this nation here, but even John would say that, I would say that you do what's authentic to you. That's the most important thing, whatever feels good. And so for me, that's the way I do it, I guess. I can say, you know, do whatever you want, but I offer some tobacco to the water, and say, sorry, I'm about to put all my junk into you, you know. The first thing I do is like, sorry. And then I introduced myself to the spirits of the land and the ancestors. What's cool about that was actually John never told me to do that in the beginning. After a while, I went back and talked to him, and he's like, "Are you introducing yourself to the ancestors?" I'm like, "No, he didn't tell me that." He's like, "They're telling me to start doing that."
You've been rude.
I was like, but then I'm like, man, so he's really listening. They're telling him. And I'm on their land. They've been doing this for thousands and thousands and thousands of years here. And so out of respect for me being in this territory whose people are still here, just not in the flesh. It's me being respectful. Like, okay, I didn't know how to conduct myself in a respectful way. And that's really what it's about. This protocol is about respect and respecting the water by putting this tobacco and saying, sorry, relative, because we're all part of consciousness. It's all one thing. And so that's why I talk to the water that way. I'm respecting it. And I'm just like, you're a being and I'm a being. Okay. I'm asking for your help. So sorry about putting my bad energy into you. And so I do that. I have the cedar and then you dunk down once in each direction and you face upstream. It's like, okay, what's coming at me today? And I dunk down and I brush the water. And I ask to, help for what's coming at me today. There's some symbolism, and each direction has its own little prayer. Each person can connect with what feels authentic in that. And then the cedar is it's like a really positive energy. It returns you to the essence of who you are, right? John told me early on that said this water will wash away everything the world's told you about yourself. What's behind that? He says, who's going down to the river? And so you do that thing, and then you come to the shoreline, and either you can put that cedar and let it wash down, you can leave it in a big pile, like it's like a bear, and they mark those trees. You put that cedar down, and it's proof that you were there, and it shows you, and it builds. That pile gets bigger and bigger. You go back for 10 years to the same spot, maybe. It's this giant pile of cedar, and it's collecting the energy. They say that the cedar collects the energy from the sun and gives you that strength for that day. And when you get to the shoreline too, you don't even he told me he was drying off one day, and this elder says to him, "Hey, why are you doing that?" He's like, "Doing what? Why are you doing that?" He's like, "Doing what?" It's like, well, you asked this water for its medicine and you're wiping it off. Why are you doing that? And he goes, "Oh." And so the idea is you don't wipe off the medicine you just asked for. You sit there and you dry. You let nature take care of you. And what's happening, as far as I can tell, is you're suffering, But the cold's going deeper, and I'm shivering, and I'm shaking, and my mind is like, oh, I want to be comfortable. And my body's like, you're fine. And then that's basically it. And then when you leave, you can call your spirit back to you because it wants to stay where it's pure. And then you go about your day, and you do it every day. And I was told, I wanted to do a full year because that's what he did, and I wanted to have that experience. And early on, I started doing this thing, and I had an issue with a friend, and randomly, I hadn't talked in years, she called me up to apologize for an issue that we had. I hadn't heard from her. I was like, "John, this thing happened. Why'd she call me?" It's like, "Oh," he's like, "because it's you're changing." And so I did that every day for about 3 years. And I didn't know it, but that was my preparation to get into VisionQuesting.
Can I ask you mentioned you call the spirit back to you, your spirit back
Yeah.
to you. And so when you're in the water, you're relinquishing your spirit into the water?
Oh man, that's a good question. Conceptually, I don't even really know. He just says your spirit's going to want to stay there where it's pure.
Okay.
Beyond that, like I said, he's not much for the conceptual desire to know. I don't really have much.
I guess what I'm aiming at is the experiential reality of what's happening.
Yeah.
Because nothing, we've done some work together, and nothing is ideas.
Yeah.
Or just concepts or theories.
Yeah.
It is all very real substance, and spirit is a substance, as is soul and all these different things. So, when you mention that and it sort of slides out, like, okay, what's the experiential reality there? And if you said, call the spirit back from the water, there's something
Yeah.
that you're feeling, that's tangible.
Yeah.
It's there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yes, and I don't pretend to understand much about it.
Cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I love, like, you know, you mentioned you're changing, right? And you, like, we go through these processes and we start to become something new.
Yeah.
And I mean, some of these very funny synchronistic type of events where, like, you change enough that you can see how somebody else was right, for example. And, like, once you see that, I've had literally that day, I bump into the person in the flesh, haven't had a lick of contact for years, you know, and then you just get to give them a hug, and they get to be like, what?
Yeah.
Or in your case, somebody reaching out to you, and how immediate change in yourself can bring about an opportunity for the full transition and shift in that mutual energy to just fully move.
Your reflection is something's happening. Like, something's happening. Look at this experience. It shouldn't have happened. Why did it happen? Something's happening. You know, to me, that's motivation to keep going.
Yeah.
Those little nuggets, to me, it's like if I didn't have those little nuggets show up now and then, I wouldn't probably maybe even gone as far as I did with it.
Sort of proof of concept type of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. Like, things will start to change, and eventually something has to happen. Hopefully. Or else it's... And that's what I love about the native stuff. It's not like, don't take my word for it. Don't. Go do it and learn. And that's what it is. It's experiential. That's why I think about oral history. This is time tested for thousands of years and countless different nations and generations doing this thing. I mean, and the teaching is still always the same. Go have your experience. Don't take my word for it. Maybe I'm a liar. Maybe I'm full of shit. Go find out.
I mean, it's sort of like that, that trickster, you know, intermingled with some of that, you know, that warrior, like, you know, never leave a pure trail, right? Or a perfectly true trail for someone to follow, just to, like, keep yourself safe. You, like, always leave, you know, it's always a fake trail, the main one, and, you know, all this stuff. So there's all these, like, base survival things that get built into the philosophies that express through these types of rituals, and the energies behind them. So, and just for, like, folks listening, 3 years every day in a river in Canada in the winter.
I started in February.
That's
bad
cold.
Real bad idea. Start in the spring. Oh my god, it was so bad.
So, you know, that takes some serious tenacity to do that in this part of the world. And, you know, the further north you go, the more tenacity's got to be there. So was that willpower something that had you'd noticed or you remember from your life previous to that?
In my eyes, that was a gift of my experience when I was 3. That thing in me that kept wanting to, like, heal, not even knowing I was looking for healing. There was a drive in me. As soon as I got, like, an inkling, like, this might help me understand what the hell is going on in here and why I'm having such a hard time in life, it was like, oh wow, suddenly it was as easy as breathing, going in there every single day at sunrise and then coming to work here and doing a full shift and then doing it, you know, that much. Yeah, I don't know where I got lost in thought there. It was back to that piece about when I was a kid, you know, how that's informed my life is that.
Well, yeah, and that will. And, you know, most often, from what I can see, will seems to arise out of pain.
Yeah, I can see that.
You know, it's very rare that, you know, if there's no pain, what is the need for will?
Right,
Things
exactly.
are taken care of. You don't need that drive.
Comfort's great. Why would I change this?
When I look at folks in all kinds of various traditions I've met, the ones who are insane when it comes to like the training or the tenacity. I'm going to do this, going to do it every day, and it's never going to stop. As time goes on, the act of adhering to the will starts to unveil the pain of the will, or the behind the will, and we start to get these layers of the will, or new types of will that have to arise, because these dense wills, these very, very dense types of will, you heal out of those. You start to oscillate, at a frequency that's lighter, and that density can't exist in that lighter place. And what I've noticed is that once that shift occurs, it can be very tumultuous, because the part of us that was determining and going, I'm going to do this thing, it doesn't exist anymore. So then, are we even doing the thing? What's the point of doing the thing? And then it's like this constant process where you equalize, and then that breaks away, you got to equalize again. What was it like moving through that process in relation to frigid Canadian winter waters?
Well, it's funny, because when the process was ready to shift, I lost my house. I had to move. I couldn't do the dips anymore.
Oh yeah? There you go.
It's like, remember that Eagle River spot I told you about?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the spot I was doing it.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I live right beside it. I was like, I'm going to be living beside this most beautiful spot called Eagle River. I'm meeting my spirit back. It's like, what? Okay. Thanks, universe. And when it was time, when I was shifting, like you're describing there, suddenly it wasn't available, because my landlord sold the house. I had to move into town. And now, instead of a daily thing, it was like a maintenance thing. And when the connection had been made, the connection was made, and then it evolved into more of the fasting started to become more prominent. And preparing for those fasts in the woods was like the next stage of that. And when I told you, I'm just sort of coming out of that now. And that's its own thing. That's still integrated into my daily practice now, how that fasting is really fundamental, and also with the spirit bathing.
And so, many people fast for health benefits and autophagy type benefits, and maybe do 3 days once a month, or take one full day off a week, maybe 36 hours or something. And a big part of that is always aimed at the health. There's fewer who do it for spiritual purposes. Was the fasting part of your work with John?
The vision questing was, yeah. I do the fast. It's like you can't separate it, It's like,
So you began doing did you start with the Vision Quest?
You know what? I did start with the Vision Quest with the Lakota people and the Sundance crew over on the island, and what I found, and I've learned, and the Vision Questing is good, but a person should be prepared for it in a proper way. If they're not, they're going to suffer. And in that ceremony, it becomes more about survival than it does connection. And that's what I've seen a lot of people miss. And so the way that I've described can prepare a person to connect to the real thing that, some people say doesn't exist. It does involve, changing the diet quite a bit, and maintaining that bathing in the river, and then that the vision questing, when prepared for it properly, will connect you to the essence of who you really are behind it all.
Make sure the mic picks you up there.
Yeah.
Sometimes the volume drops.
Yeah.
So when the diet's changing, is that brought about through your own sensitivities?
Yeah.
Or awarenesses, I guess.
Awarenesses of how You got this dark wolf and you got this light wolf. And that dark wolf, man, he likes some chocolate, he wants some pizza, he wants the cravings and desires and the flavors and the dopamine and blah, 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 blah. And that's all it's going to create a disconnection inside. And you have, so the vision questing thing is, you do 4 days, no food, no water, and do that every year for 4 years while spirit bathing and while you're in the woods there too. But the biggest problem I see is that people go and they hear about this and want to go do the thing without doing that 3-4 years of doing the bathing first. And they're not ready for what's going to happen out there. And
I think we undervalue the power of rituals. And it's not just the thing that you're doing, it's also the thousands of years of that ritual having been done. And there's a power that builds up behind a ritual. And like you said, it's easy to take preparation for granted.
People that want to go jump into these things, they don't get what they think they're going to get. People traditionally were prepared from the cradle to go and fast this way. If we prepare for just 2 or 3 years every single day, we might get just an ounce of what people used to have doing this stuff. And that's been my experience so far, and I've seen other elders and people doing these particular ceremonies. I keep losing my train of thought. But
the elders are doing these ceremonies, and we were looking at the differences between trying to get the end result without doing the preparation, and the preparation being essentially bred into you from birth.
Yeah, there's just no shortcuts this way. I just love it. There's no shortcuts.
Right.
With the vision questing, it happens when you're ready, not because you want it. That's where I was going with that. Yeah, I didn't plan on fasting. There was nowhere in my mind at all was there going to be, I'm going to do a vision quest. So I had done a couple on the island, and they didn't go well.
And what does that mean?
Well, there was no preparation. There was like, oh, you want to do a vision quest? Give me $500. I'll put you up on the hill, and I'll have some chicken afterwards, and you'll have a spiritual experience. And that's what a lot of people were going through, and I thought that was spirituality until I experienced this.
So in those situations, how can we say this? What was being pedestalized for you and the other participants as spiritual experiences? Because I think this is really important for people to recognize, whether it's experiences they're having through their own personal practices or things that are being pushed upon them by communities.
Yeah. Well, there's community around it, and there's inclusivity in people that are seekers. And then you have spiritual experiences for sure in other dimensions. But the people I've seen facilitating these things, they have no self-control themselves. There's power over. There's ego issues. There's a lot of drama that always have surrounded it. The ayahuasca circles, the sundown circles, the drama. I'm like, why? Is this healing or is this just power? And it seems like the more the power grew, the ego grew with it. And it just kept blowing up all the time. And all these dramas, people were getting hurt.
The participants or the
participants
leaders?
And the leaders, both.
Mm.
Yeah. Until again, I met this fellow John, and he showed me the slow way to do it. And there's no rushing it. I was out, how it started, I went fishing with my buddy. We came across this spot in the woods, and I thought to myself, oh, this is a beautiful beach. We're like 40 clicks in the backcountry. And I thought, this would be a great place for a vision quest for somebody. And like literally the next day, I get a call from my elder, and it's like, oh, have you thought about doing a vision quest? I was like, I know the spot. And it's like, when you're ready, these things happen. There's no, I want that thing. And there's this grace element to it that when you're ready, is obvious. And there's so much support when you're ready. But when somebody sees the guy in the sweat lodge singing a song and flashing lights come in and those spiritual powers are like, oh, that was cool. I want to try some of that. Or they're in ayahuasca and they can feel the medicine. They can see the lights and the flashy things. And they want that. And of course, who wouldn't, from the West? And it's very fascinating. It's very exciting. And but at the end of the day, to me, it's a lot of smoke and mirrors. So when I've had experiences in those circles, it's usually ended with some sort of power over abuse and somebody getting hurt and the community falling apart. I've seen that probably 3 or 4 times by now. Yeah. And my guess is that the kind of humility component, there was a guru looking for followers because he had medicine to give, and he did. But there was a part that wasn't actually, right teachings from the wrong place is what I was told.
Yeah, I mean, I had one friend back in the day who would always say, it's very hard to do the right thing because you can do the wrong thing for the wrong reasons, the wrong thing for the right reasons, the right thing for the wrong reasons, and eventually the right thing for the right reasons.
Yeah.
And, it makes any actual action very tricky because the internal volition has to be fully taken care of.
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, that's been my experience so far in that world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like they said, the best mentor is a guy who doesn't need or want to be a mentor. Right? Yeah.
I mean, it is fascinating because that, I've been fortunate enough to find people who really wanted to spend time with me and help me out. And of course, at the time, I was always like, oh, because I'm special. But then looking back, it's like, oh, you see someone that's so messed up and so broken, like, of course you want to help them a bit, right?
Of course.
But when that help was riding on the back of a need to speak from that person, that compulsive speech, compulsive teaching, compulsive helping. Over time, I started to notice like, 85% of this is harming me.
Mm-hmm.
And even though the overall intention is with, the want to help me, there was so much damage, and everything about the individual that they hadn't sorted was stuff that was getting put into me. And this happens. There's a power dynamic. Just by the same way, when you mentioned being in theta as a kid, we open ourselves up and we start to absorb at levels that we don't have any comprehension of. And you start noticing, oh, it's interesting that I have like the same broken things in me that this teacher does. And initially it's like, okay, did they put it in me, or was that what attracted us together?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what actually causes teacher to find student and student to find teacher? Is that you resonate on the broken stuff? Yeah.
Or it's like, to me, it's that the broken stuff is what opens us. There's an openness that I think draws people together. That, again, that experience when I was 3 opened me, but it also broke me. And it's like, there's this, it's broken openness.
Words.
To me, there's like when you're broken in that way, there's such an authenticity to it. You can't fake it. And suddenly, I think perhaps people of that, cut from that cloth are drawn because there's like, you've been broken open, and here's how it looked for you, here's how it looked for me. And then suddenly we're helping each other and sharing. And who's further along that path, like John was saying. And I was drawn to that because I guess, we resonate at that level. And even in my line of work now, I mostly resonate with people that are like, they lived on the streets and did all the things and they got through to the other side and now they're just so authentic and real. I'm like, love you. And their history is so shady. And it's like, but in such a beautiful way.
Right.
Yeah. Because of what, it's just, we all have our stories.
Yeah, there's something about it that I think really aids in integration.
Mm-hmm.
Because it almost creates the deficit for integration to happen, or the void, or essentially like the concavity, the mold, to be filled and worked with. It's definitely something. So, you have 10 years of school. where you're learning chiropractic
Yep.
stuff, and you're learning all about the physiology of the body and nerves and all this interesting stuff from the health front. And then you start doing the spirit bathing. That's about a 3-year process, and then slowly this starts to shift and move towards a VisionQuest-esque type of preparation, and that's sort of this these peaks that we're oscillating into are the vision quests once a year, and then there's a rhythm that takes you to the next one, and
Yep.
I imagine it's somewhat of an upward slope on those. They constantly.
You can call it upward. It's something.
It's a thing.
It's a thing.
There's a thing that happens.
Yeah.
So you're working through that process, and we touched briefly. There was some diet shifts and that kind of stuff. But you have such a deep health background.
Yeah.
And we started this conversation with discussing methylation.
Yeah.
So as you began and continued through and evolved with this spiritual side of things, in what ways did the health part of your understanding become affected?
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 I don't know, whichever the correct one is.
The physical part?
From a health standpoint through the physical, and as relayed emotionally and mentally as well. But starting with the physical, because that's an easier place to begin.
Oh man. Let me wrap my head around that one for a second. It's just like the layers, man. Never mind like 5 years in men's groups learning how to identify what I'm feeling and the emotional part. It's just like, yeah. Mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional, the medicine wheel, and understanding how that really works and how, and health, right? Define health. Well, which part of it? Mm-hmm. Every part is as equal as any other part.
So whichever, whatever is the lights shining on for you at the moment, that is what I'm asking about.
Yeah. Well, it's really coming together in the whole idea of finding that balance. So for me, as I understand, so not that it's hierarchical, but the foundation to me is like the spiritual part. It's like, no matter what happens, I'm going to land on something that's bigger than me. So the culmination of all that vision questing, it was like I connected to something that I can't even name or weigh. And that connection's always there. In ways that were not before. And that's what, again, it was that 7-year process of the spirit bathing and the fasting, and then that finally came in. And that gave me the ability to listen a bit more. And about how, from at least in my experience, the food was such a big deal because my genes were mutated. And I was hyper reactive internally to anything I would put in my mouth, everything. So everybody's gonna be different with that. But for me, the fundamental piece was food because my whole body was out of balance because of the homocysteine and this genetic and the methylation process that was broken. And so for me, it was like I couldn't really listen because there was a bunch of static in the background of my nervous system because of my broken genes. So at this current state, it's creating a physiological balance internally, integrating the fasting and eating seasonally in the natural ways of the food that is from this area, and then so health, right? So and then the men's groups and learning how to take all this into a relationship with other humans and my girlfriend too, and how does this have utility is what I see a lot of the time. The spirituality of things, people expand to the reaches of the universe, but they have a lot of trouble with relationships. And they have a lot of concepts, a lot of theories, but can they function with an open heart and somebody who's triggering them or have emotional conversations or when in conflict, and have that be resolved in a way that creates more connection instead of separation.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
So how did it first come about that from all this work that you began to notice this crossover into normal life?
But it was right when I finished my last VisionQuest, and I have been doing men's groups in Mankind Project and other groups for about 5-6 years as well. And then suddenly, in these groups, there was something available inside that wasn't there before. I would know what needed to be said or done. Maybe it was to sit back and say nothing. Maybe it was just, there was so much more available. Not because I was doing anything, but the real utility of all that spiritual work I saw in relationships, in men's work, and with my girlfriend. It's like, okay, this stuff it actually should help me live a more balanced, happier life. And life is, to me, we're tribal people meant to be in a relationship with other humans, fundamentally. And I guess probably, in the last year and a half, after completing that whole cycle, making traction, doing Hakomi.
Yes, Hakomi.
Yeah. Hakomi is a Hopi word, apparently. It means, like, who am I in relation to these things?
Which is very fascinating because, back to your initial story of being 3 years old and the identity crisis, when that spine of your identity, speaking of, walks out or leaves or disappears. And you mentioned there's this big identity crisis and you don't necessarily recognize it, but it starts to become more apparent as time goes on. And then it comes full circle, however many decades later, on the back end of, or at the culmination of all of these phenomenal practices and ceremonies. Who am I? And you find this Hakomi, which is, it's so funny because we're always look at who am I in relation to, me.
Mm-hmm.
And then, sometime in adolescence or high school or, early university, whatever, you start deciding, most of us will start deciding, this is who I am, this is what I think, this is what I believe. And then that gets sort of grafted on to the part of you that grew up and, has all its habits and patterns. Yep. And then we graft on this identity. Yep. And those two slowly get welded more and more deeply together over time. But through this breaking away from habitual illusions of identity and self and who we think we are, and breaks away again and again and again and more subtly as these ceremonies go on and the process unfolds. And then there's this thing, it's like, okay, you start noticing, and this is a really key point in spiritual practice, that this thing and this thing aren't necessarily so separate, as we thought they were. And then you get this whole other evolution of identity crisis, which is this thing and this thing are the same, so there's a mutual resonance, we could say. Mm-hmm. This starts to build, or a harmonic of you and me. And then there's somebody else. And then there's a harmonic of that, but it's different than the harmonic of this. Or a different environment, a different forest, a different tree, a different river. And a whole new type of identity mishap starts to potentially arise. When you're working with the Hakomi, and who am I in relation to all the things that Hakomi relates you to mm-hmm. through its questioning, did you find that your background with the VisionQuests and that whole process gave you, well, you said like a place to land on all the time, but we could say a comfort within that space of uncertainty?
I would say that. Yeah. I mean, that's just always there now. Mm-hmm. And really, too, in those states, how it all comes together, too, we talked about like regulating the nervous system, right?
I'm doing.
But what happens though, because again, putting it all together, the big picture of chiropractic, right? And so a well-functioning spine allows the brain to interpret well what's happening inside because it's not making the information go askew. But when the brain's functioning well, when my identity gets challenged, think that I'm actually attached to, that I didn't even know I was attached to. When it gets challenged to call me or my relationship. Because I've found eventually at this point a way to regulate better is I've become less attached because I'm more regulated in my parasympathetic than I am my sympathetic. And so when I was more sympathetic dominant, it was hard. I was more easily triggered when a part of me would get challenged and how call me or all those things. Whereas now, because of all this work, I can the gap between the part of me that's being challenged to let go of and to die, the part of me that's identified with at that young, tender age, is now, it doesn't have spikes on it anymore. It's not as prickly. It's not as...
I think I don't know if this resonates with you, but a lot of the, when the nervous system is so hyper responsive, we're often looking for external things to lean our identity on.
Yeah.
And when that gets challenged, it's not just, oh, hey, you're being pig-headed, blah, blah, blah. It's, no, you're trying to not die. So of course you're reacting like that. And suddenly when you're not trying to not die, and there is that comfort and that peace and that, oh, cool, like change, flux, flow, then of course you can let that go. But when it's being held on to literally for the dear life of the current identity, it's I find that leads to some interesting types of understanding, recognition, and the processes that we're going through and other people, humility. It's hard not to have that stuff crop up. The more that connection and that interrelationship and interconnectedness starts to become very clear and very paramount. As proved out by the experiences that you mentioned that you enjoyed because they were some proof of concept. And that, this connection starts to prove itself out again and again and again and again. Now, in terms of relationships, I know for a lot of people that are doing a lot of spiritual work, it's a point of contention for many folks. I don't know if it's something you're comfortable discussing or if we want to sweep that one under the rug for this, because I don't want to, I don't want it to be too impositional.
Soft with it.
Speaking generally, you've been to all these men's groups, so I'm sure a topic that comes up quite often is relationships. In what ways, through all the work that you've done, are you relating differently to relationships than many of your classmates or co-goers, participants? I think contrast might be the easiest way to, nudge at this without being too invasive.
It's that's kind of a tricky question. At this point, it's like I found a partner where it's like the relationship is the path, and in that, the same energy that was going into the spirit bathing and the vision and all those things, it's like, and now I'm seeing this sort of, to see the divine in other, in relationship. In my relationship to that, we're able to unwind and see patterns of conditioning that are generations old. And this work has been allowed her and I to be able to pull apart once we get through the triggers, where we can come back to a certain place. We can say, oh, No, this is the wound that was keeping my heart closed. And this is the wound that was keeping her heart closed. And in that, we can actually understand the armor that was developed. And the relationship is the tool to understand how to open and when it's safe, how and when and why does it close, where's the balance between the two. And so we really are like helping each other a lot in that way. And we have somehow committed to like just keep riding out the ups and the downs. It can get really, really, really intense. First, the boundaries are like landmines. It's like, stay away. Eventually, through us not breaking up and just like going through and relearning emotional intelligence and ways to have conversations about understanding what created this blow up in the relationship, the story around it, and then how to use that in a way that creates more connection instead of less.
Do you find there's a time lag on that? Or that time lag in terms of dissipating those landmines?
Shorter.
Yes.
It was very big. It was like in the beginning, it was really hard.
See you next month.
Yeah, it was really hard in the beginning. But we're both stubborn. And no, really, we both have connected to some very authentic, real deep places that are calling and drawing us to connection for something greater. And when we both have connected to the vastness of the human abilities of experience, and together, when that comes in relationship, it's like, it's just such a powerful teaching that you probably couldn't have gotten on our own. She's big into astrology, and I know even in my chart and hers, it's like, how many lifetimes can I spend in the cave or the forest or the mountain and becoming one with everything, and how? And this creates a situation for all of that experience to have utility here and now on this planet, and those wounds that created such a well-guarded heart now are actually starting to teach me. And in terms of like knowing myself, because how can I know how I've created my protections as to have somebody to like bounce that off of and see, I wasn't actually creating connection with you, sweetheart, because I was afraid of XYZ. That's how I've kept my heart closed. So now in a relationship, I've been able to understand my protection. And when I come into my work as a chiropractor, I can actually see that I've opened. And people feel it when I touch them. One patient, she's like, that's the most love I've ever felt from your hands before. And that was what I can tell is because of my work with my relationship. It's like I've opened in a very tangible way that somebody could actually feel when I touch them.
Oh, absolutely. And that's so key, is that tangible aspect of it. And I mean, anyone who's done a lot of, say, standing work, if you're standing in that heart's clenched up, there's rigidity through your touch. And as that starts to open, there's a very, very incredibly obvious relationship to all the connective tissue and all of this subtlety, minutiae that works through the tips of the fingers and beyond, and that release extends beyond the flesh. To the point where, like, I remember I used to do retreats for myself at home over like Christmas, New Year's and stuff, because I didn't want to be in a room full of sick people, up in the mountains at a passionate thing or something. I did one of those and then would do them at home consecutively for many years. And there was one of those retreats where this whole area started opening, just rash, all the stuff, this pustules, whatever, just started coming out. And then I was like, I had a pull-up bar in the kitchen, and I was like, I wonder, and I just hung. And it's like minute after minute after minute after minute went by. And it wasn't hard. It wasn't an issue. And it was because there was no longer, at least for the time being, because there's always another layer, contraction that was inhibiting this life force, this profound life force from reaching the digits and actually passing beyond. And so the people I've met who excel with the open heart thing, they're so good at hugs. Like they're so good at that.
Yeah.
And there's a softness to it. It's a very soft, water-like cocoon.
Yeah.
And in stark contrast to those who, if we're using the hug analogy, get attached to hugging being the thing that's good, that means that you care about people, but it's hard, it's brittle, and you're like, yeah. You want some space.
Yeah.
And there's always representation in the physical body and in the connection, in touch, both physically and touch through the energy, through space.
Yeah.
And we start to look at those responses in terms of the reflection of our work being expressed all around us. And when there's that softness that starts to appear around you, it's a really good indicator that this is starting to open. There's an ease outside, and it's reflecting an ease inside. And things that are in contrast to that don't want to be around it, because it makes more obvious the stagnation or the tension or the brittleness that is in contrast to that openness and that warmth. And oh man, it's a very cool thing. And to have like your patient, who's, I am assuming, been to you many times, immediately just go, yo, something's up.
You know what I see time and time again is my schedule at work. If I got something going on, suddenly my schedule is like, look at all those gaps. And then when I'm starting to like put it together and things just start, like my capacity increases because I'm more connected and it's flowing, suddenly it's like, it was way less. Unless I get 50 people a day and I'm just like, what did I change? Like I didn't do no marketing, like nothing. The only thing that's changed is inside. There's always these reflections of like, yeah, it's working or it's not.
Right. Absolutely. I think it really keeps you honest.
Yeah.
And again, that humble pie, like, every time I've ever got my head like stuck up my own butt when it comes to whatever it is that I'm doing, or that I think I should be doing, or that I want to be doing, or that's dumb and only for these people and only for that mentality and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. It always becomes the thing that I have to explore and that I have to do, because it has to be the next step.
Yeah.
And you always have to confront that part of you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the guy in the men's groups who can't stand that guy, but I know that's the guy I've got to like deal with. It's like, every part of me says no, which is exactly why we're going to do this thing right now.
Yeah, it's just like, I don't think it feels good for anyone though to be like, oh, I'm your practice.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes there's just like a repulsion to somebody because part of me is just terrified of what he's going to reflect in me.
So over time, I mean, and this seems to be the way it goes, is that the path is always initially, almost always, about the individual.
Yep.
And it has to start there.
Yep. And
then over time, it starts to expand and grow to encompass your relationship or your partner, and then your path to what some might refer to as like divinity or light or this type of stuff. The path is through that individual, and they become a part of your path, but at the same time, it's does it feel like a vehicle for that path? The relationship becomes a vehicle for the path. Is there because I know for some people who do a lot of spiritual type work and a lot of, say, purifying the spirit type of training, there's a type of apathy that can set in, or a type of dehumanizing of people, because you know all your own patterns. You go, oh, I'm just like one of my yoga friends loves this. It's like when I say it's like, oh, I'm just a bunch of habits, right? And you start to see that, and then you look at other people and you go, you're just a bunch of habits. You're just a nervous system acting out habits. So at what point is there a transition from the self-work back into the humanity, and that through a part of it?
I mean, to me, it's like we're the closest to the divine when we're a little kid. When we've been conditioned by our family, and so that, to me, that stuff has to get brought up. And so in relationship, to me, it's like that's what brings all of our conditioning up. We're great and we're enlightened in the mountain, but we get into our mom and our dad and our brothers and our sisters, and all of that work suddenly just goes poof, right? Because all of those parts that were subconscious were still subconscious when I was in the mountain. But now suddenly in a relationship, whether it's romantic or men's groups, but I think to flush up those parts of our conditioned ego that are actually like sitting still constricted and blocking ourselves from actually connecting deeper, we need to see them and sort of like tease them apart a little bit and actually allow for that expansion, because you're still going to contract. Because as soon as I go back to my hometown, I'm contracting back to my dark little self again. What's that all about? Right? And so to me, it's like through a relationship, bit by bit, those old patterns pop up to be reviewed a little bit. And I do believe personally our astrology has a lot to say about maybe what we're here to learn in each particular life. Maybe there's somebody who's like, no, like you go up to the mountain for a couple of thousand lifetimes and you really get to know that part of yourself. And then somebody else is like, they've done that, but now they have to actually pull different parts apart. And so for me, at least, it's like, for sure, the parts of myself that I'm seeing in relationship, I couldn't see that stuff when I was expanding in all the plant medicines and the sweat lodges and the spirit bathing and blah, 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 blah. I could not see that part of myself. It was so deep. But as soon as I'm in a relationship, it's like triggered. What's that all about? And with the right partner who's also willing to want to know what's on her side of that, or his, or whatever, we can like decompress together and unpack. And then suddenly, I'm enlightened. I'm enlightened to an aspect of myself that I forgot, because it was packed away when I was 3.5. Mm-hmm. And so to me, that's the path. It's that little pure heart. I see a picture of myself before my dad left, and I'm like, that kid, so much joy. like you don't even know. Just you wait, give it a few months. But I see that part of myself in that picture. I sit on my dad's lap, and such connection inside, like any little 3-year-old or 2.5 that has had that support.
Yeah. I mean, even just when you say connection, there's a stability that just rocks through your body.
And we all have that.
Yeah.
And however we can connect to that, maybe somebody never lost that and they have a different path. But for me, it's like the purest connection we had when we came to be incarnated. We were born into a human body, and our connection is the strongest before we get really conditioned and to function on this side, in this world, in this realm. And then how do we get back to have that connection again? To me, we have to pull apart that conditioning. And
so that sense of connection and, I mean, a type of stability is a part of that. Is that, do you feel like these days, as you keep cycling through and you move through each process, and now it's through the relationship process, that stability and connection is starting to return, that sense of identity?
Yeah, even like with, again, getting the genetic testing done and getting my body functioning properly again is a part of it. And what you just described. And finding out what I'm afraid of and like going on the other side of that. And however many ways fear shows up.
So fear, resistance, turbulence, any tumultuous experience as a doorway forward. Mm-hmm. And that's where you don't know where your next step is into the fires, so to speak. And that could be a very good place to close it. but it makes me think of one more thing that I would love your perspective on. With the synchronicity type of mindset, there's often it's easy. Like even for us to do this today, like we had two options of places that we could do this. We go into one and we start looking at how we'll set it up, and then someone's doing a massage session or something in another room, and she's like, you guys are gonna be quiet, right? It's like, okay, we'll go somewhere else. And so we end up with a beautiful wall and really nice colors. And so there's this contrast though. The path forged through fire.
Yep.
And the path of ease, yep, which can be a good indication that you are following, surfing the wave of these energies and of synchronicity, and that when you do end up in trial by fire, it's because you're not surfing that wave. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no mistakes. I think when I have ended up there, it's like, here's a lesson for you. It's like, yeah, fail. Not that there's success, but to fail my way to success, to fail my way to the flow, and to deviate from that flow place, and understand that I chose that direction because there was something for me there.
Of course.
That fireplace is like, oh, why did I choose to ignore that sign?
Right. So
right?
It illuminates blockages.
It illuminates a blockage. Oh, I wasn't listening. That's why the situation happened. Cool. Now let's trace that back. Let's reverse engineer and just see why I made that choice. Oh, there was a shadow, a belief, a lack of self-worth, and I actually couldn't listen because wrapped up in my story. Aha, what was that story about? And so it's always fuel for coming back to this. When I'm connected to that place, yeah, there's a flow state. And I can return to that more and more often. And when I'm not on that, it's like, cool, how did I end up here? Instead of judgment or resistance to it, they're just like, okay, what am I feeling? Do I know what I'm feeling? Is there, let's investigate here. What the hell just happened?
The first time someone introduced me, I think I must have been 19 or something, to this question of, what are you feeling? And I was like, I just looked at her and I was like, I don't know. I got no idea.
Surprise.
And then a few years later, the guy who got me into meditation more deeply asked me that. And I was like, oh, there's like some stuff moving around and like some pressure and prickles and stuff and, in my guts and whatever. He's like, yeah, but like, is it an emotion? I was like, I don't know. Yeah. And it's just like, oh, you might want to look into that. And, it's just such a trip when you look at, okay, what am I feeling and what's going on? And this wave or these, when you depart from it, like you so eloquently said, and are confronted with trial by fire, the opportunity that's there, and this I found a very liberating perspective starts to arise of, everything that has ever happened in all of ever, cosmologically, interpersonally, through all of the history that could possibly exist and not exist. Just everything has led to exactly this right now. Mm-hmm. Exactly this moment in everybody's life and everything's life. And I remember when I first had that thought come through, and it was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And it's such a sigh of relief, because then you didn't fuck up.
No.
You got here exactly as you needed to.
Yeah.
And those lessons become illuminated. And it paves the way for growth and for shift and for change and for deeper connection with light and source and stability and freedom of the need for stability and all of the things. And if we are only looking at the pro side of surfing that wave, then we can miss out on a lot of those tumultuous gifts that are popping their way through our lives.
Well, that's the beauty of a good partner, really, to me. That fire, that's my relationship, man. Like, I'm in the fire more than I like sometimes. But when I'm there, I'm like, okay, how did I create this? What did I do? What didn't I do? What wasn't I listening to?
Mm-hmm.
And then once we've regulated again, now we're getting better at that, because again, by putting it all together, they were like, oh, okay. But here's what the fire had to teach. Here's where I went unconscious with my patterns that conditioned part of myself to control. And I didn't even know. And now I'm becoming more conscious of the more aspects of my my being, of the person who I was, am going to be, this character that I'm playing in this part of my life that keeps evolving and changing, and becoming more authentic in the moment. Because the more I actually, now that you say that too, it's like there's more I can identify what pushed me into that fire, the more I can actually integrate that part of myself. And actually what I feel too is that it makes me more authentic in the moment, because I know that part of me, and I love that part of me. I don't have to like release an emotion or separate. To me, it's all about like identifying and feeling and integrating and being whole with all those parts that I separated from at some part in my life. And again, that's what led me into the fire in the first place, an unconscious pattern, and it's reflected in my relationship once again. And now it's like, okay, back to center again. It's way easier and less self-judgment, better functioning nervous system. I can see it more clearly, and life is just getting easy, man. It's like it actually works.
Yeah. That's perfect.
It works, man.
That's perfect. You've got the key, the car is starting, it's
Yeah.
running. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I think that might be a really perfect
Yeah.
note to close this out on. It works.
It works.
And it can become easy, and that growing equanimity that allows for the greater and greater acceptance of all those fluxes and shifts and those burnings off and all this stuff that doesn't require us acting in contrast to ourselves through, like you said, oh, I'm going to release that emotion or transmute this to that and get in the way and do all this tinkering. That release or centeredness, the equanimity or centeredness are the very similar in and out poles of the same thing. It allows for all of that to take place, and that full functioning potency of the human to begin to rear its head. I really want to thank you for being so open and having this chat with me.
Yeah.
I don't know if you do any social media type stuff, or if there's a website or anything you want to plug, or if you run nature events or men's groups or anything that you'd like people to follow you on.
One day.
One day?
One day.
Well, we'll do many more of this. I'll be coming through this town with regularity, I think. So we'll do many more. Thank you, everybody, for listening. If you're interested in my stuff, you can check out the website, which will be in the link below. And thanks for your time. Enjoy. Bye.